So we're in Genesis 29, 31 to 30, verse 43. Jacob has two wives now, Rachel and Leah. He'd been cheated by Laban and thought he was marrying Rachel. Turns out he's got Leah. Then he's given Rachel afterwards. Rachel is the wife he loves, but she's the younger wife. And so there's a real mess in the home. And we read this then in Genesis 29, verse 31. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too." So she named him Simeon. Again she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." So he was named Levi. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "This time I will praise the Lord." So she named him Judah, and then she stopped having children. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children, or I'll die." Jacob became angry with her and said, "Am I in the place of God, who has kept you from having children?" Then she said, "Here is Bilhah, my servant. Sleep with her, so that she can bear children for me, and I too can build a family through her." So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her, and she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel said, "God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son." Because of this, she named him Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "I've had a great struggle with my sister, and I've won." So she named him Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "What good fortune!" So she named him Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, "How happy I am! The women will call me happy." So she named him Asher. During wheat harvest, Reuben went out into the fields and found some mandrake plants, which he brought to his mother Leah. Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" "Very well," Rachel said. "He can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." So when Jacob came in from the fields that evening, Leah went out to meet him. "You must sleep with me," she said. "I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he slept with her that night. God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a 5th son. Then Leah said, "God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband." So she named him Issachar. Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a 6th son. Then Leah said, "God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor because I have borne him 6 sons. So she named him Zebulun. Sometime later, she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and enabled her to conceive. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, "God has taken away my disgrace." She named him Joseph and said, "May the Lord add to me another son." After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me on my way so I can go back to my homeland. Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I have done for you." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I've learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." He added, "Name your wages and I will pay them." Jacob said to him, "You know how I've worked for you and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I've been. But now, when may I do something for my own household?" "What shall I give you?" he asked. "Don't give me anything," Jacob replied. "But if you'll do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages. And my honesty will testify for me in the future whenever you check on the wages you have paid me. Any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark-colored, will be considered stolen." "Agreed," said Laban. "Let it be as you said." That same day he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all the dark-colored lambs, and he placed them in the care of his sons. Then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks. Jacob, however, took fresh-cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees, and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. Then he placed the peeled branches in all the watering troughs, so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the flocks were in heat and came to drink, they mated in front of the branches, and they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked and dark-coloured animals that belonged to Laban. Thus he made separate flocks for himself and did not put them with Laban's animals. Whenever the stronger females were in heat, Jacob would place the branches in the troughs in front of the animals so that they would mate near the branches. But if the animals were weak, he would not place them there. So the weak animals went to Laban, and the strong ones to Jacob. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. Now, we haven't got time in this brief devotion to go through all the details, but it is bizarre, isn't it? 2 wives and then 2 servants and kids popping up all over the place, and buying the sex bed at night with mandrake plants, and then streaked and speckled sheep left, right, and centre. What on earth is going on in all of this? It is somewhat confusing. But let me just focus in on this aspect, and that's this: that God is fulfilling 4 separate parts of his promise to Jacob previously, as Jacob was fleeing his home, having been involved in the deception of Isaac and Esau. And God had met with him at Bethel and made promises. As he was on his own in a strange place with absolutely nothing, God made some promises to him. And at this stage, we see that God is fulfilling those promises. Firstly, about descendants. Back in 28 verse 14, Jacob being told that his descendants would be as the dust of the earth at a time when he had no wife or family. And now he's able to say to Laban in chapter 30 verse 26, "Give me my wives and my children for whom I've served you." The promise of God is taking shape. He's fathered 11 sons and a daughter from having had nothing. So that's Jacob's descendants. Secondly, Jacob's blessing. God had said to Jacob that in you and in your seed, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Chapter 28, verse 14, echoing the promise to Abraham back in chapter 12. Now, Laban here confessed that he had been blessed as a result of Jacob. He said, "I've learned by experience that God has blessed me for your sake." Verse 27 in chapter 30. So Jacob underlines this point in his reply: "The Lord has blessed you since my coming." So God has kept his promise about the descendants and the blessing, also about the possessions. We read he was blessed with material wealth. Thus the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Chapter 30, verse 43. This summary is similar to what is said of Abraham in Egypt, back in chapter 12 and verse 16. And actually, interestingly, both, despite their sinful folly, Abraham and Jacob have been blessed with possessions outside the land of Canaan. And then fourthly, a reminder about Jacob's land. God had told Jacob that he would bring him back to the land of promise. Chapter 28, verse 15. And now that Rachel had borne a son and Jacob had fulfilled the stipulated years of service, he was eager to return. That home was still very much to the fore of his mind. And so he says to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place." He also added, "and to my country or land." Chapter 30, verse 25. So actually, in all the complexity of the details and the bizarre happenings here, we're actually seeing God's promises to Jacob be fulfilled. And actually, it encourages us to bear patiently the trials and afflictions of the present visible world, and to keep before us the promises of God about the as yet unseen but eternal world. 2 Corinthians 4 verses 16 to 18 tells us, "Therefore we do not lose heart, though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we're being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." At the same time that Jacob was called to trust God when he made those promises when he had absolutely nothing, and we now see those promises being fulfilled in reality, we too are called to trust the promises of God about the unseen eternal world, even though at this moment we can't see it. But what do we do with all the nonsense details and the wives and the kids and the spotted sheep? Well, God is fulfilling his promises to Jacob in blessing him, but the way it's all happening is not through ease and comfort and Jacob's goodness and cleverness. It's in the face of Jacob's deceptive manipulation, this mixture of bizarre and perhaps wise methodology and actions which are almost impossible to work out the motivations or morality of. And actually, doesn't that sound like life? We don't receive God's blessing through ease and comfort, nor do we grow spiritually or the church grow because of expert methodology or pure morality, but in the messy mix of meddling and cleverness and, at times, frankly, morally dubious motivations. What we're seeing is God at work in strange, unseen, yet faithful ways. Do you sometimes find yourself being cheated, taken advantage of, and unfairly treated? Well, don't respond with malice or revenge or manipulation, but seek to be honorable and wise and trust the Lord. Are you tempted to think that you're flourishing in life because of your cleverness and wisdom? Make sure you give God the glory for what actually might be a miraculous turning of your naivety and folly to good. We live in a society that has taught us to look out for number one. This means taking whatever steps are necessary to assure ourselves of success and achieve our goals or ambitions. Many Christians, sadly, can compete with Jacob as master manipulators, at making their own way through life and taking their destiny into their own hands. But that's not God's way. God wants to be recognized as the source of our success. Shrewd or cunning strategies, especially when they involve a level of dishonesty, are counterproductive to God's work in our lives. Just as God negated Jacob's attempts to succeed in order eventually to replace them with his own blessings, God sometimes uses failure in our lives to draw us to depend on him. Brother Andrew, in his book God's Smuggler, tells of his work in bringing Bibles behind the Iron Curtain in the years before the fall of communism in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. On one trip across the border into Romania, he was behind 6 other cars. Each one was taken apart by the patrol. On some cars, more than an hour was spent, during which seats were taken out, hubcaps removed, the engine partially disassembled, and everything unpacked in the search for the smallest bit of illegal literature. When he saw how thoroughly cars were checked at the border for illegal contraband, he decided on an unusual strategy. "Dear Lord," I said, as at last there was just one car ahead of me, "what am I going to do? Any serious inspection will show up those Romanian Bibles right away. Lord," I went on, "I know that no amount of cleverness on my part can get me through this border search. Dare I ask for a miracle? Let me take some of the Bibles out and leave them in the open where they will be seen. Then, Lord, I cannot possibly be depending on my own stratagems, can I? I'll be depending utterly on you." So instead of trying to outwit the savvy of the border patrol, he determined to make no attempt at hiding his literature and to leave the matter to God. Brother Andrew then took several Bibles from their hiding place and set them on the seat beside him. With great trepidation, he drove up to the checkpoint when his turn came. It was my turn. I put the little VW in low gear, inched up to the officer standing at the left side of the road, handing in my papers, and started to get out. But his knee was against the door, holding it closed. He looked at my photograph in the passport, scribbled something down, shoved the papers back under my nose, and abruptly waved me on. Surely 30 seconds had not passed. I started the engine and inched forward. Was I supposed to pull over out of the way where the car could be taken apart? Was I? Surely I wasn't. I coasted forward, my foot poised above the brake. Nothing happened. I looked out the rear mirror. The guard was waving the next car to a stop, indicating to the driver that he had to get out. On I drove a few more yards. The guard was having the driver behind me open the hood of his car, and then I was too far away to doubt that indeed I had made it through that incredible checkpoint in the space of 30 seconds. My heart was racing, not with the excitement of the crossing, but with the excitement of having caught such a spectacular glimpse of God at work. This was only one of many occasions where Brother Andrew found that abandoning his own strategies and putting himself entirely in the hands of God brought success to his work. In this way, he demonstrated that God was responsible for all he was able to accomplish. It's not to say that we should never plan or strategize, but it does point out the need to acknowledge God as the source of our prosperity and to give him credit for all that works out well in our lives. Are you tempted to despair because nothing seems to be happening? You can't see God in your circumstances and you want to try and take things into your own hands. Realize that God is in it for the long haul, working his purposes slowly but surely. And just a final thought, do we long for the homeland as much as we ought? Jacob knew that he wasn't where he should be. He had to get back home. That was the final bit of God's promise. Are we working hard, providing for our families, being a blessing to those around us, but uneasy in a foreign land, knowing that it's the world to come that we're living for?